It's Money Talks, the July edition. Yeah, we are in July and we're here to talk about football finance, about Liverpool Football Club and spend and the Premier League and beyond. We're even getting over to American sports and basketball today. And I'm joined as ever by Dave Powell. Dave, thanks so much for coming in again to speak to us. Appreciate it.
I love coming in, but I'm just a bit disappointed that we mentioned last time we were going to have some kind of checkers we could play here, some movable money, something to represent what's happening.
It'd be like a crabs table if we were moving money around on
like,
this.
So, but you know, I like the decor, but in reality, you know, next time let's get some movable figures.
Well, for those who are listening as audio, yeah, you're not missing out too much. It is just a prop of a football pitch. But we are here, as ever, to talk about football finance and things going on in football related to money that are topical. And over the weekend, it was really interesting in terms of transfers, but also the reasons for transfers and how clubs are creatively or otherwise getting around these PSR issues. From a Liverpool point of view, it came to prominence because of Anthony Gordon and because Newcastle apparently, depending on who you believe or listen to, but apparently approached Liverpool with the idea of selling one of their star players because they needed to get some money in quite quickly. Now, that one didn't happen. They managed to sell a couple of other younger players who I guess the fans will be less concerned about losing and was able to get round it that way. But it does suggest that PSR is biting a little bit, that football clubs are more concerned about it. And so before we get into the knock-on effects of that, it is interesting that it's almost a transfer deadline within a transfer window now, this idea of by the end of June, you need to get your affairs in order, and you can see the football clubs are generally worried about it. Well, some who need to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the optics of the Anthony Gordon deal from a Newcastle standpoint aren't great. Anthony Gordon's a player they signed from Everton for 45 million 18 months or so ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And he's been a good performer for him last season, hence the reason why he's in the England squad that's at the European Championships at the moment. So there is no strategic reason other than having to meet PSR for them to try and sell Anthony Gordon, other than he isn't Bruno Guimaraes and he isn't Alexander Isak, who are their two most valuable assets. And those are the two that I think they've been most keen to keep hold of. Maybe they think they can make up what Gordon brings somewhere else, but I think in terms of when you're trying to find players in the market, such as Isak and Guimaraes, I think it's very, very difficult. So that's hence the reason why they did what they did. But yeah, we were in a transfer window within a transfer window. I mean, Liverpool's financial year finished end of May. They had, as you would expect, very little concern in terms of PSR. There was only themselves, Wolves, I think it was, I think Arsenal maybe the other club to have a May end of financial year. Everyone else is June. Villa extended theirs this season, early part of the year, so they could factor in an additional month so as to make use of the fact that the transfer window was open, they could sell some players, which they did. They actually came out of it reasonably well. They lost Douglas Luiz to Juventus, but they've managed to bring in two young players from Juventus, plus Jan Matson from Chelsea, and Lewis Dobbin came in from Everton. Obviously, going the other way was Timo Obenham. So all this is done among teams who there's that kind of simpatico need to raise money through sales and bring in revenue, and that's been the driver of it all, really. Newcastle left it to quite late in the window. Or in the financial year to do much about it, and depending on, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of Newcastle's finances, but from various reports I've seen, the sense seems to be they're reasonably confident about it, although not entirely certain they've done everything they need to. But it should be instructive. It's I think we talked about it in the past. It's not a great look for the Premier League when you've got upwardly mobile clubs like Villa, Newcastle, teams that want to bridge that gap, who are being forced to sell their best players. In some cases to rivals. I mean, it's a terrible look if you're Newcastle and if those reports were true, you are approaching Liverpool and saying, would you take Anthony Gordon and can we have Jarell Quansah? I mean, for Liverpool, I don't think it's not a great deal. I think Quansah's got so much pathway left to go. But it's not a great look for the Premier League when that happens, when we talk about maintaining some kind of competitive balance between the league. It's in effect it's the opposite of that. But it's I've mentioned previously. I mean the lack of regulation when it came to PSR didn't keeping up with the times. The fact that, or even inflation, regulation didn't really change. That 105 million you're allowed to lose minus additional allowable deductions has never really moved. Yet we have inflation which has seen costs increase hugely. The arrival of the broadcast deal in a big way in the early 2010s, from like 2013-14 onwards, really saw a huge surge in wages, transfer fees. So all that happened after regulation was brought in, whereas the likes of Chelsea and Man City were able to kind of establish themselves pre-regulation. But yeah, we've found ourselves in this position, bizarre position where teams are just having to work together to try and make themselves just compliant. They're not making any really competitive ground. They're just trying to make themselves compliant with these rather arbitrary financial rules that really should have been replaced a while back.
You talk about the look for the Premier League, and I think something else that needs to be sort of brought into that, and what isn't a good look is this trading of young players almost like cattle. I think just doesn't feel great. Like as a football fan, academy players are the ones you look forward to and ones you've often sort of got an affinity with, and it seems like they've become the most valuable assets because it is sort of pure profit. And so I worry that academies will become profit machines rather than places that could actually give you players. So from a fan's point of view, but also sort of from a business point of view, you think, well, that when you mentioned their PSR being sort of a little bit out of date, really, I can't imagine that anyone ever thought when it was sort of brought in that what the knock-on effect is going to be, people swapping young players between them just to sort of comply.
Yeah, I mean we're almost at the point where we need to have will there be a conversation around you have to have X amount of not just homegrown players as in English players, but homegrown players as in from your academy that represent you in your match day squad every week, because Chelsea have spent more than £1 billion on transfer fees. Largely, that has been offset in terms of keeping them PSR compliant. Yes, they've had to sell things like hotels as well, but they've been able to stay within touching distance, knowing that they could pull on these other levers by selling what has been an enormously fruitful academy conveyor belt from Cobham. So the amount of players that have had touch points with Cobham Academy, and they've been really good at getting those players out on loan. But yeah, I mean, largely some of them will arrive in the system and know that they're not really going to make much of an impact at Chelsea. I mean, I look at the Everton deal for Dobbin. I mean, is Aston Villa going to be in the Champions League this coming season? Lewis Dobbin, showed some glimpses of good stuff for Everton, but I'm not sure whether that deal happens if this doesn't happen. And is his?
You expected his next move from Everton to be a step down rather than effectively a step up.
And it's is that standing in the way of his own own progression? Could he have potentially made an impact at Everton this season because they're going to be a bit light in certain areas? So these things don't really sit that well. I mean, like you say, you're right. I mean, I know these lads are well paid, they're well compensated, they're living a dream in effect. But when we get to the point where it happens a lot in North American sports, where trades happen, players have no say about it. It's just you're told and you're gone. Elements of that about this, because the reasons for it are obvious. I mean, we weren't really outlined at the start, but to sell an academy graduate gives you pure profit because they have no book value at all, because they've been you produce that talent yourself. It's not like when you sign a player and you have to sell over and above their remaining book value on the accounts in order to record a profit. So it's much more profitable enterprise to create your own players, find a way of. I mean, and FSG, I'm sure, would have seen this at Liverpool and seen this as a way to why perhaps they're pushing forward with this move into multi-club territory, because they'd like to find more ways of getting young players out and playing in appropriate leagues, and like Chelsea have done really, and making that player trading model more profitable. But it doesn't sit well, I mean, because we should, like you say, I mean, there is that element of pride, isn't there, whenever you see, I mean, you think some of the actual Liverpool greats, even in modern times, are products of the system. And when we start to have to, when clubs are starting to have to move these players just sideways, that's what it is. It's a lot of sideways movement.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point where it's not for the benefit of the player, it's just for the benefit of bean counting, really. And that's, it's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, especially when it just seems to be facilitating more spend in the future, and that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah,
so Newcastle, get to the end of June, think they've done what they need to, and then the very next day they're spending money again on players that aren't necessarily better than the ones they've shipped out.
That's just it, and it's the transfer market drives football to a huge level, not just from a financial point of view, but from interest. I mean, the transfer market is what generates interest and chat around things. When people familiarity breeds contempt half the time. Even if teams are successful and they stay together, the fact that no change has been made, familiarity breeds contempt. So, so they'll enter. We're in a new financial year for all these clubs now, so the situation changes. PSR's got this season to run, and it's replaced with the squad cost ratio rule, or squad cost ratio rule akin to what UEFA have got. Now, there's similar type of things are going to apply there. We've got salary caps coming in, so clubs are continue to have to cut their cloth. But I think now clubs are trying to get their kind of house in order ahead of that, so they can enter in the transfer market. But are they going to be signing players which are hugely impactful for them moving forward? I'm not sure. The likes of Villa, I think their issue was they had very limited space to manoeuvre in the transfer market in terms of PSR. So but when you've got a Champions League campaign, you need your team to be deeper than you do normally, because it's a big undertaking, especially when there's 8 games from this year, not the usual 6 guaranteed in the group stage. So you need a big squad. You need a squad of more quality. So I think they've tried to look at it and think of ways that maybe they think they can replace Douglas Luiz in the new financial year. But this deal represents them. They effectively got 4 players for selling 3.
Yeah.
How impactful those players will be, I don't know. But certainly Jan Matson was a Champions League finalist last season. So there's different needs for different clubs. For Newcastle, I think theirs was mainly try as much as they can to hold on to Isak and Guimaraes, because they're 2 kind of players they can build around. Everton's is around just keeping their nose clean ahead of a potential new takeover, where they can finally at some point draw a line under what's been. And that's it. Everyone's got different reasons for it, but ultimately all it will lead to is the need to spend more this financial year anyway. So I imagine we're probably going to have this same conversation in 12 months' time.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because, if people are using it just to sort of spend, then you end up, never really getting out of this position, because it doesn't seem to be about long-term financial health. It seems to be about, well, what's going to get us over this line so we can then spend money again, because I don't think anyone's squad's better. For all this sort of horse trading and things like that, there's no one who I'm looking at and thinking, they're in a much better position sort of squad-wise than what they were. It feels like a lot of them have ended up sort of a muchness, really, so they'll still sort of want to spend. So like you say, when we're doing July 2025 money talks, you'll probably be on CBS by then, Dave, to be honest with you, and I won't be able to afford you, but when you pop in and remember us, we probably will be still having these conversations.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's a damning indictment of where we're at with the Premier League. I think the fact that this kind of player trading has happened. I do have an element of sympathy with the clubs that are engaged with it. Some of them, Villa will look at it and think, well, we've broken into the top 4 on competitive merit as well. They were an excellent team last year, and is it right to kind of for Chelsea and City, etc., were allowed to build up that level of traction before financial controls came in, and obviously the likes of Liverpool, Manchester United, and Arsenal were able, the huge clubs which rely on huge revenues, and Spurs, they got the new stadium, so all that debt which they've accrued from that's an allowable deduction, so they'll be fine. They'll be have one of the strongest balance sheet, I imagine, over the next 10-15 years. I think Spurs are going to be in a position to be enormously strong over the next decade or so because of the way they've done that. But it impedes progress for for those who want to challenge. But I mean, that's the idea of maintaining status quo. I mean, no one really wants, everyone likes the idea of competitive balance. But I mean, if you've got more people trying to eat your lunch, then that's not always a good pill to swallow for owners of the top teams. But Chelsea's is again, we touched on Chelsea's a different one altogether because they've spent so much, I mean, so aggressively in the transfer market. They've been so the fact that the Premier League have had to change their rules around how long contracts can be amortised over kind of says all that needs to be said about that. I mean, it's capped at 5 years now, whereas Chelsea have still got players. Can't be done retrospectively. So Chelsea have still got players who have got contracts amortised over 8-9 years. But all they're doing is bringing back money again to try and spend, and it's money that other clubs couldn't rely on. So it's a bit of a sorry state really of the transfer market, but also of the fact that the lack of regulation to maybe see that this could have potentially been a problem further down the tracks, and has led everyone to this mad scramble to kind of make player trading profit and not improve people's teams. It does smack of that kind of element of North American sport where teams do these kind of trades, inter-team trades, to remain under salary caps, to protect their future interests. So it's kind of we've moved down that direction to travel. But we are facing the Americanization of English football anyway. So
the other thing that the Premier League are trying to keep an eye on is the valuations, the player valuations that are attached to this, and it's something that the Premier League have said that I don't think they've necessarily called any deals out in particular, but they just said that this is something they're going to be monitoring. And I think a lot of fans of these clubs involved have took umbrage with that and pointed to other deals in their past. But I think it's sort of fair enough because the potential problem is, so clubs have worked out, if I give you 20 million and you give me 20 million and we swap players, then we both get 20 million pound profit, we both get a player each. But the problem with that is that someone could just go, well, why don't we just say it's 30 million then? Or why don't we just say it's 40 million? If we're just swapping the money between each other, then what does it matter? And you're just increasing your profit and increasing your own spend. And so I think the Premier League sort of had to say, listen, we're going to be keeping an eye on this, because otherwise, I mean, you could value each other's players at whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a strange one because it would almost require an entire rewrite of the transfer market. So you say the base value for a player is if they've played 10, 15 games in the Premier League. So that creates a value of, I don't know, 2 or 3 million if they've played in the under-21s for their country, depending on what band in the country is, etc. All these things count. But the challenge for the Premier League, I mean, they've had to say something, I think, because they have to have been seen to, I think, maybe say that, look, this can't get out of hand. The same way that you would do sponsorship. Yeah. They have fair market value for sponsorship. I think the same way is, look, you can't sell Lewis Dobbin. I feel sorry for Lewis Dobbin. I'm calling Lewis Dobbin out a few times.
He's the one we know best.
He's the one I know best. Is that goal against Chelsea? No others. You can't just, there couldn't be 30, 40 million pounds for Lewis Dobbin because there's nothing to support that in the market. But there is, clubs could look back and say, how can we have what's a fair value when, to use Liverpool examples, Jordan Ibe, Ian Brewster, were those valuations true for the value of the player at the time? I mean, they raised plenty of eyebrows, and it was kind of like the recruitment team at the time were kind of lauded for huge success in getting values like that for players, which hadn't been hugely impactful at first team level for Liverpool. I'm not too sure how many games Brewster played at first team level for Liverpool, but it wasn't too many. But that was a 20 million fee.
Yeah, he has a really good loan at Swansea, and that's where they get the
and those type of things can make a difference. But I think Villa could argue that Timo Ogbonam had a good one at QPR.
Of course, yeah.
So I think there's been precedent set in the past for clubs to say, okay, well, how have these been worked out? I mean, because they'll always look retrospectively at ways that they can, because if the full force of the Premier League came down and said, we're going to investigate these deals because we think these are, overinflated, it'd say, well, what happens to these deals? Were these deals not too high? But I think the issue is the kind of interclub nature of it and how everyone's got a sympathetic need for all this to happen, which is the real kicker, and the thing that will have to be investigated, because if it's an independent deal, no one's paying those kind of fees anyway, but people are willing to pay more when there is mutual benefit, mutual interest. So maybe that's what needs to be looked into. I mean, how some kind of element of contract and regulation drawn up around deals between clubs when they both have potential issues with PSR. Maybe it needs some kind of arbitration in place, almost like you have tribunals in place, where the fee is determined by a panel. Maybe when these deals come into effect, maybe that's what needs to happen. But when you've got clubs who are scratching around with hours to spare trying to raise some money, and it can take months and months and months to get a panel of anyone to sit and make and determine issues, that doesn't seem likely. But as we progress with football, who knows what happens. But I think in those kind of deals where people have got mutual benefit for them both to sell players at high values, I think maybe some kind of arbitration, Premier League arbitration, comes into play.
Live tribunals on transfer deadline day, the future of Sky Sports News.
Like Judge Judy. He's the nice American judge that keeps on letting off anyone who's got a sob story. So, but yeah, stuff like that. I mean, it's we're kind of, everything we talk about is always new territory. There's no real precedent for anything. I think that's probably the case for the last 18 months I've come on this show. Every time we talk about it, it's new territory for every single thing.
People find new ways. Football clubs are always going to be ahead of regulators, and they'll find new ways to sort of, get around issues. And so there's laws come in, and then people live with them for a while, and then people maybe dispute them, and then people find a way around them, and then maybe they're changed or maybe they're not. But if they are changed, then they'll find, I guess, new ways to kind of stretch it or bend it or in Man City's case, maybe try and take it to court to sort of change it and talk about it.
Determined to get me to say something about Manchester City.
I would never, Dave.
But I think an element of it as well is because, I mentioned it previously, so broadcast revenues went up so quickly domestically, and then they plateaued, and we're kind of there with it now.
Yeah. And
all that'll happen is it'll start to stagnate and decline, whereas international revenues are still going up, but the same thing will happen. So they can't rely on that forever. Commercial revenues, now there's a lot of levers in place to stop, for fair market value. Clubs can't just go and say, well, I want this deal to be 150 million, otherwise, that's when you kind of open Pandora's box. So they're trying to find way. On match day revenue, there's only so much you can do. Prize money you can't rely on. So one of the things they can rely on to a greater extent is player trading, because if they're creating more players and creating a better pathway to sell players, then they know they're creating more profit, which is kind of what we're seeing. So I think it's a product of clubs needing to raise more revenue away from the traditional, which has led them to kind of this weird transfer market we have now.
Just final question on this before we sort of move on to the Boston Celtics story. You suggested a couple of times that you think that the current PSR is a little bit unfit for purpose because of the changes that you've just talked about, the increases in revenue and things like that. To your knowledge, are there ongoing conversations about that? Obviously there's been challenges. The Premier League, or chairman or whoever owners have recently sort of met up. I'm sure those conversations were at place there, but it is a difficult thing to do, and the vote, the way it is structured, needs a lot of clubs to sort of vote for any changes, really. But do you sense that there is a desire to at least sort of look at the fact that the rules as they are now are maybe not fit for purpose?
Yeah, I mean, it's Nassef Sawiris, who's Villa's co-owner. They made the claim that they should. Well, they made presentations saying they wanted to try and get it passed that it would be raised to, I think, 130, which would have kept them, within it.
Yeah.
And not had to sell maybe Douglas Luiz. But it requires the buy-in of the kind of majority, and they didn't have that. I think it was only 2 clubs that actually supported that. So maybe that's instructive to think why that was. I mean, everyone wants to, kind of protect their own interests. Certainly clubs that are PSR compliant don't particularly want to give more leeway to other clubs that are in the league that are around them. So the likes of Crystal Palace, etc. Why would Brighton want to give more reason for other teams to spend more when they have got the biggest PSR gap of anyone in the Premier League because of their player trading? So they're thinking, well, we've done it. Everyone should, this is a thing. This is a model which you can work within, but you have to do it the right way. So there will be an element of that. But also it's kind of, we're in the final knockings of it now. It's placed ended this coming season with squad cost ratio rule, but even that's going to require a lot of bean counting, a lot of finding ways to, payroll is going to become an even bigger thing, and with this, because that's going to be one of the metrics which is measured against. So what player trading profit is, so you know it's going to be revenue and player trading profit minus amortization costs, wages, etc. So that's already going to come into play. So I imagine it's not going to be the last we see of trying to make player trading profit to the benefit of clubs, which is why the Premier League are probably thinking, what's their next move going to be moving forward? But the regulation of PSR hasn't really kept in line with the growth of the game, because not everyone can be Brighton. They really can't. You know,
Yeah.
I think there's about 10 clubs in the Premier League who'd love to have that model, but they just can't. So it all depends what, you know. I think clubs are just clearing the decks now for the next coming season. I don't envisage a huge spend from some clubs, because they'll still be concerned about what happens the following season with the changeover to squad cost ratio rules. So I think it might be a slightly kind of lukewarm transfer window for most this summer. Say for Chelsea. Chelsea just seem to do whatever they want.
Yeah, they'll find a way.
They'll find a way. I'm sure there's a leisure centre or or something they can sell to kind of make that work. But in the main, I think we might find that clubs are keeping their powder dry a little bit more than maybe normal.
Apart from Liverpool, hopefully, who are about to go on a £200 million spending spree, of course.
I'm sure we said that last summer.
Or do Liverpool owners have other aims? Are they going to have other things to spend their money on, namely a basketball club? They wanted a basketball club for a while, and the one nearest John Henry's house is apparently come on sale. I mean, first of all, why haven't they just won the... I was going to say the World Series, that's a different sport. The NBA champions, the Boston Celtic, I do know enough about it to know that they won the big trophy, and then now the owners had enough, wants to sell. That's a bit mad.
Yeah, the one Brooklyn Nets game in March, and he thinks he knows it all. So the Boston Celtics had a fantastic season in the NBA. They won the NBA championship, and they did it with, I think they only lost 4 games in the postseason. They got a fantastic squad, albeit a very expensive squad. In terms of payroll, but they've been owned since 2002 or 3 by a consortium of wealthy local Bostonians, including Wick Grausbeck and Stephen Paliuka. Stephen Paliuka was linked with Liverpool investment 18 months, 2 years ago. Wick Grausbeck is involved in the PGA Tour investment, which FSG are involved in. Well, John Henry's involved in. So there are people who are well known to each other. I mean, I imagine if you're a billionaire and you live in a city the size of Boston, you're probably going to know the other billionaires.
Same country club.
You're probably, you're all eating at the same Nando's. Which doesn't exist in America, which blows my mind. But this has come up for sale, largely because they're on a crest of a wave. Valuations are really high. I think the Celtics was valued about $5 billion. Now that's a huge increase on what it was, especially for a team which, basketball teams, you've got cost controls in place, your salary caps, etc. But the small arenas, revenue in terms of kind of game day revenue is relatively small, because they're smaller, small arenas of 15, 16, 17,000. Seem much bigger when you're in there because the court's so small, whereas, but they have limited, they've got a huge media deal coming down the tracks though, so it's going to be, I think, 75 billion over 11 years is what they're looking towards, and that in turn has seen valuations rise enormously. So last year the Phoenix Suns were sold for 4 billion, and that lit the blue touch paper for a few sales actually in sport, and it actually made it kind of trickled over into football, because people were thinking, well, if it's the first time a big kind of blue chip team had come for sale, so people were interested to see what kind of the valuation increase was, and it was huge. There's a few things with Boston. They're selling it now because I think they're talking about estate planning. I think that was the idea. Because the fellas owning it are getting on a bit. They want to try and move the money around, maybe move into different aspects, and thinking it's a good time to cash out. I think they paid 300 million for it. It's worth 5 billion.
Wow.
Now. So someone's getting paid. But it's a good time to sell. It's a buyer's market. Sometimes you can leave it go too high, whereby you run out of rich people to buy these things, and you're requiring huge amounts of money. And the problem is, for the NBA, sovereign wealth is not yet allowed to take a stake in the NBA team above, I think it's 10 or 15%. Neither is private equity. So there's not too many, if you're holding on to it, waiting for these people to come in, you're going to be waiting a while. So you can't, there's only so many people they can sell it to. They're effectively, whenever these teams come up for sale, these are the fellas that are named as the people that are rich enough to buy them. So now they're selling it. Whereas FSG are looking to buy an NBA team. They've had an eye on, when the Minnesota Timberwolves were mentioned for sale about 2 or 3 years ago, they had a look at that. They had a look at the Phoenix Suns and passed on that because they had their eyes on Vegas. LeBron James is an FSG partner. He's spoken about the desire to own a team in Vegas.
Has that gone quiet now then, the Vegas stuff?
No, it's all. It's an expansion franchise. So the teams, the league's 30 teams now. It will be 32 teams with an expansion franchise, and probably Seattle, probably Vegas. Vegas is boomtown now, so they've got the F1, they got an NFL team.
Hockey team of champions.
Yeah, they are. Then Golden Knights, is it? They got an NWSL team which is really popular. So they've got a lot of money is flowing into Vegas in terms of real estate. So there's also arenas being built in the hope that there'll be an NBA franchise there. So all of signs seem to point to kind of Vegas. But LeBron James has always said he wants. Well, the idea has always been he'd helmet, but he's still playing, and rules forbid any active players from having an ownership stake. So he'd have to, if FSG did buy the Celtics tomorrow, they'd have to divest. He'd have to divest his stake in FSG. And he'd have to buy it back at a later date if he wanted to. But I think they want him to lead this. So, but he's still playing, and he's still a good player in the NBA.
He's playing with his lad now as well. He wanted to do that for a bit.
So he said he wanted to hold on his playing days until such time he had the opportunity to play with his son. Now his son was drafted last week in the NBA draft to play alongside in the LA Lakers. Now, I don't know how close he'll get to the starting rotation of the Lakers, because I think he was quite low down in the draft picks. Also, I think he was quite low down in projections for where he would land anyway. But that's by the by. So, but maybe this is LeBron's last season. I think he's probably got another 1 or 2, which maybe means the Celtics thing might come around too soon for them. Also, do FSG have the appetite to own 2 big Boston franchises in the same city? They already take heat for having too much interest in Liverpool. And that doesn't sit well. And likewise, people think there's too much interest placed in Boston or the Pittsburgh Penguins.
So would the 2 clubs have their own fan bases? There'd be some crossover, but is it not as much crossover as what you'd think?
I think, you'll know, you've been to the US enough times yourself to know, there's a lot of crossover in terms of sports fandom. People tend to support the city and its teams, so they'll if they have an interest in vaguely any of the big sports, baseball, American football, basketball, there'll be ice hockey, there'll be an interest in the city's team. So it's the Bruins, the Celtics, the Red Sox in Boston, and to own 2 major teams.
Pats as well, Patriots, would that
they are, they're green.
It's not far, is it? It's a bit the nearest one.
Someone they're probably screaming at me telling me where it is. I didn't know where it is.
It's an hour.
Somewhere like that. But yeah, so it would mean owning 2 huge Boston sports teams, as well as owning the Boston Globe. And while, newspaper, so you become kind of all-encompassing with Boston. I don't know whether that's too much for them. Also, LeBron James has a fairly checkered past with Boston fans. Over comments he's made in the past about the city and its history. So I don't know how well that plan would sit, but it might well be that that is what happens. But I don't think they do things on a whim. They'll be looking at, I'm sure, what the numbers look like for an acquisition of the Boston Celtics, because at a $5 billion valuation. They're probably going to have to pay something like that for Vegas team anyway.
Right. Even though it's a brand new team.
Yeah, because what you have to do is you have to pay. It's almost like the money you're paying there's no only selling it that you're buying it off, but what you are doing is all the other 30 teams are thinking, well, 2 more teams that are fine, pay us because we don't want you at the table eating what we've got.
Yeah.
But if you are, then that's where the money goes. So it's distributed around the teams. And the valuation will be pretty high because if the Celtics are going for $5 billion, then a Vegas franchise probably can look at 4 to 5, something like that. But so they have to look at that kind of money anyway. So, but I think the notion of the fact that would they have to alight themselves of Liverpool or another, no, and I don't think any of the signs point to that because I think some of the moves they've made in the past 4 or 5 months, some of the most pointed in terms of where they're maybe thinking about Liverpool because they've been strategic ones. So FSG International being created, Michael Edwards coming into the fold, multi-clubs, this, that and the other. So they seem to be doing more around the Liverpool brand now, and I don't think that's going to pull away from that anytime soon. They've got plans for Pittsburgh and real estate. The Red Sox, John Henry's already said they wouldn't sell because they're Bostonians and they live and work in Boston. I wonder whether they want the headache of another set of fans getting on their back about a lack of spend. And also it's an expensive thing to run a basketball team which has already expensive talent, and they have huge contracts on there, like Jason Tatum's like $300 million of the life of his contract, so they're huge contracts. But they know intimately the people who own the club and own the team, so I'm sure it's something they'll look at. But I would be surprised because I think the goal for a long time has been Vegas. But if this is seen as a golden opportunity, who knows? But I don't think it's going to make them. I don't think you're going to be see moving parts and having to sell other things to pay for it. I think they might get a few more friends on board, maybe.
Well, that was going to be my last question, because regardless of whether it's Boston or Las Vegas, £5 billion is a lot of money to even the most wealthy people. So would they be looking at other assets and thinking, well, could we sell one of those? They be thinking about just how much they want to own? Because you talk about owning 2 sports clubs in one city and the sorts of pressures around that. But generally, for any of us, the more things we're involved in, the less focus we can have on them. So, financially, the idea of, concentrating your efforts or mindset on something. Do you ever, not ever, but do you envisage that there might be some discussions where they think, well, maybe it's time to leave the Liverpool project alone to sort of concentrate more on this basketball team? Or do you think there's enough there financially and otherwise to do it all?
It's all about valuation. And I saw an investment proposal into which was an investor deck, which was presented to potential investors last year. It wasn't Dynasty, it wasn't their proposal, but it was from another company that was proposing to make investment to Liverpool, and their pitch to would-be investors was Liverpool will be worth 11 billion by 2030, top estimate. So I don't think it'd be that high that quickly, but if I don't know, there's certainly no reason to say it wouldn't get to 7, 8, 9 fairly swiftly. I mean, they're at 5s now. They bought it for 330 million in 2010, so there's a load more money to be earned from that. But also it requires investment into making it a good team. But it's fairly self-sustaining, and with new regulation coming in, which greater benefits, I think, the likes of Liverpool in terms of keeping a competitive balance among the top teams. I mean, there is no competitive balance among the rest of the Premier League. That doesn't exist. But among the top teams, I think maybe it's a bit more. And the Champions League expanded format. The FIFA Club World Cup's going to change format from next year, and Liverpool aren't part of it, but they'll be hoping to be within time. That's going to be hugely valuable. There's going to be games played in the US. I know Tom Werner said yes, Jen and John Henry said no, but it's going to happen. Maybe not in the next 3 or 4 years, but it's going to happen. The Champions League final will be played in the US by 2035 probably, if not before then. These things will happen. They're just natural passage of time. Sounds, I know it's not a thing everyone wants to hear, but it just is happening. It's already happening around us. But there's loads of growth in football, and especially in the US. They're not going to want to alight themselves of their most valuable asset. Liverpool's their most valuable asset. They're not selling the Red Sox. They don't need to sell a team to raise capital to get involved, but they will have to have help from them myriad of wealthy friends, I'm sure, to get something done. But I think there's probably a few too many roadblocks in terms of them maybe going for the Celtics. I could be wrong, but I think they might stay the course with what they had planned for Vegas, which could be another 3 or 4 years.
Just thinking we're going to struggle to go on Shim's bus to the Champions League final if it's in New York, won't we? We'll have to go there.
Get subsidised travel.
Go on a cruise ship. The content you could do. Imagine that. Money talks from the Atlantic Ocean.
Flying from the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, the stuff we could get recorded on the way over there. Who's your favourite basketball team? I don't know this.
The New York Knicks.
New York Knicks.
I can get around New York on the subway without even checking Google Maps. Well, to like the main places where I go all the time. That's my flex. That's my superhero power.
And he's got a colour TV so we can see the Knicks play basketball.
Yeah, that's it. And that's me. So they're a good team now as well. So.
Thanks a lot to Dave for coming in, as ever. For you guys for listening or watching, however you've enjoyed it, I hope you have.